Great. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be over here in Boston again. Mindful it's lunchtime and you're eating, so I've got a few slides, but don't worry about taking notes. All the slides will be available afterwards. If you do need any of them, get in touch with the organisers or get in touch with myself. But I'm going to try and give you a little bit of context about the overall corporate venture capital ecosystem. We work with, or we track more than 7,000 corporates over the past 15 or so years that invest either directly in startups or indirectly as limited partners in venture capital funds which take the stakes. And they're taking minority private equity stakes, just to give a little bit of context for those who don't necessarily know a lot about CVC or corporate venture capital. GCV, as Roger says, we're a bit like an association or an organization. We provide data, reports, news. We do events, conferences around the world. And we also do sort of training and benchmarking through a membership organization as well. What we do find is that effectively corporate venture capital covers all the main sectors, all the main regions, and that in effect healthcare is one of the most important ones. It goes all the way back to J&J in the 1970s. And as you see the impact of the ecosystem changing over the past 50 years, so that pace of investment is accelerating to support the M&A and the R&D teams as well. So I'll talk a little bit first up about that impact, share a few slides about that, and secondly, about what's been happening more recently in terms of the deal flow and the attention that's being focused within the broader venture ecosystem on the CVCs. For those who are a CVC, obviously do use the QR code to take our annual survey. We get about 500 CVCs around the world that take the survey, helps us understand the changes and the different stresses or important issues around the world. So, as I mentioned, the important thing to remember about corporate venturing is it's been part of this big change, not just in healthcare, but that other industries are learning from, that's helped the overall ecosystem go from developing most of their drugs or most of the therapeutics internally to most of it coming externally. And that external comes through the great work that sort of Mass General Brigham does in terms of developing the great research, but then forming the startups and helping them develop, which can then be acquired or partnered to help scale up, all the way from Pfizer and Moderna to anything else. But obviously it doesn't just replace the R&D, the internal, the great things we've been hearing more recently about GLP-1 and those sort of things, but it's very much a complement. And being able to allocate your resources most effectively or efficiently, whether M&A, R&D, or corporate venturing, is the key role that most corporates are thinking about. And in that regard, it's been really successful. Those that are active CVCs don't just get a higher performance in terms of their stock price than their peers, they also get stronger free cash flow delivery. The companies that are backed by CVCs are less likely to go bankrupt, and they're more likely to exit and exit more successfully or profitably as well. And for the VCs as well, what you find is that if you're backed by a corporate as a limited partner, you're much more likely to have your next funds being raised. So take MGB Ventures. I'm sure Roger will say a little bit more, but he has corporates as LPs. They're now onto their third iteration, their third fund. It's that type of approach. You're more likely to do it if you have corporates behind you. And that's because if you take it from an entrepreneur's point of view, what she's looking for is 5 things. She wants capital, she wants customers, she wants to develop a product and service, she'll eventually want to hire people, and she'll want an exit. And all of those things are more than just the capital and a bit of advice. If you can add value and align yourself on those strategic goals that the corporate and the startup can have, then together you can be really successful. And what we're finding is that from being quite a niche idea, maybe certainly 50 years ago when J&J was started in 1973, but even through to the dot-com period in the late 1990s, 2000, around the millennium, The idea that most corporates were interested in venture was for the financial returns immediately. It was some sort of magic bullet to do it. And that's kind of still there. You can get good financial results. You can improve the performance. But the strategic value add to the parent company is significant. And we're seeing that the corporate parent, while understanding those earlier slides, are investing more. The teams are being built, they're getting more resources, and they're more integral to the success of the overall organization. It's a great place to be. And what we're seeing, therefore, is that over the past decade in particular, there's been this large increase in the number of active CVCs, an order of magnitude increase, in fact. And this has been a big reason why the overall venture ecosystem itself has grown by an order of magnitude in terms of the amount invested, the number of venture firms, the numbers of deals being done have all increased over the past sort of decade. Now, obviously, since the sort of interest rate rises, most VCs have retrenched a little bit. They're finding it harder to raise capital, and they're finding it harder to do deals. But from a CVC point of view, they've provided a lot of the resilience, both in terms of their LP commitments to make sure new funds are raised, and being co-investors to make sure that the right deals, the early stage deals, have that follow-on capital. So we're seeing that the CVCs has been remarkably consistent all the way through the past couple of years in terms of numbers of deals and the proportion, as the overall venture ecosystem has retrenched a little bit. And I think one of the things I'm super excited by coming here, it's such an amazing conference, the World Medical Innovation Forum, it's such a great job that you all do here about creating the future, about making the world a better place. But as you take that more holistically, we're seeing a lot of changes within the healthcare industry, new entrants coming in, some of the tech folks, groups like Apple, being sort of medically recognized as a hearing aid for their earbuds and those sorts of things. But actually, the implications go a lot wider. Healthcare is an $11 trillion industry. It's actually enormously valuable in creating the conditions that we all live in. But the conditions of how CVC has developed by the people we're going to hear on the panel next are actually being used by other sectors and other industries, both to try and work out how they can co-invest, but also how they can use those techniques and skills, being an LP, being a direct investor, land in the value back with the parent company, working with the portfolio companies. And I think that's the area I'm most excited. The impact of you all here in this room isn't just within the industry, within healthcare, but it's actually being taken on by the rest of the world and in other sectors as well. And I think that's really exciting from my point of view. Now, I'm greatly delighted that I don't have to say too much more. I've got a great pleasure of listening to a wonderful set of panelists who'll talk. I'll sit at the end there, so if Roger does need to call out some any questions, or if you have any questions, happy to answer them. But I'm going to say thank you and let Roger come to the stage.
Great.
Thanks, Aaron. Good to see you, buddy.
So thanks, everyone. So this is an exciting panel because it's a lot of people we've partnered with in the past. And so the first thing I'm going to do is just ask each of these funds to introduce themselves, a little bit about their fund, how they work, what is success for them, those types of things. And then we'll go through each of the corporate VCs, and then we also have an entrepreneur here as well. So I'll ask Rahul, who has a number of corporate investors invested in Mediar Therapeutics, to just talk a little bit about how that works. So Tim, you want to start?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the invite, and thank you to Roger for chairing. So I work for Eli Lilly, currently the world's biggest pharmaceutical company by market cap. Just get that out there. And our model, we're mostly a fund of funds. So we mostly invest in external venture funds to Lilly. We've spun out our internal corporate venture funds many years ago. And we use that primarily as a mechanism for bringing in breakthrough science into Lilly that complements the later stage BD work that our therapeutic areas do. So great example is we are actually investors, full disclosure, in Mass General Brigham Ventures, who are really a terrific partner for us. They create a whole number of really innovative new companies that we wouldn't perhaps get to see so early if we hadn't been LP investors. So that's just one example of many funds that we've invested in. We also invest in individual biotech companies. Again, full disclosure, we're investors in Mediar, which is really a wonderful fibrosis company that you'll probably hear a bit more about. Getting close to early stage innovators, doing important work that can get through to patients. Hopefully, those are all early catalysts for fuller BD partnerships later on as companies mature, and we will pay market-based rates to do those deals. So, success for us, learning, exposure to science are the sort of softer criteria. We're fully strategic, which means that this is all done for science and opportunity rather than financial returns, which you'll probably hear is a little bit different to some of the other colleagues on the stage. And ultimately, we get rated on pipeline impact. It's just over a longer period of time than if someone comes with a phase 2 asset and we buy it tomorrow. That's a more immediate type of science that's important too. But if we hopefully invest in some of the next generation of breakthrough science, as the Lilly corporate entity catches up and becomes more and more interested, those can catalyze really transformational changes in our company. So for example, many years ago, we weren't in RNA therapeutics, we weren't in gene therapy. We obviously invested in some companies, we got to know everybody, we made the case that this is breaking science now that's really important. And now we've just put up here in Boston an enormous building in Seaport that's our Institute of Genetic Medicines, which has, I think it's 14 floors of scientists and incubator space and venture people all looking to bolster that. So that's one journey of many that we've done. And I'd like to think that many of the friends and colleagues on the stage here and all the biotech founders are the people that ultimately over the longer term made that happen. So that's why I'm here, and always excited to hear from people about new science and new ideas that could become companies and then ultimately pipeline value for Lilly. So that's me.
Great, thank you. Christina?
Yep, I won't repeat much of what Tim just said. I'm from AbbVie Ventures, and we are also, typical CVC model. We invest to partner. We invest dollar sheet, money off the balance sheet in order to access innovation and talent and ecosystems, particularly in areas where we don't currently have boots on the ground, where investing in highly strategic about how we're accessing those ecosystems and strictly focused within our core therapeutic areas, oncology and neuroscience and immunology being kind of the top 3 TAs, and in eye care and aesthetics as well. So looking forward to the discussion, and thank you for having us today.
Great, thanks. Aaron?
Thanks, Roger. I want to thank the MGB organization for the invitation, our friends at MGBV, and Jim for the nice setup. So I'm a managing director at the Novartis Venture Fund, and our model is a bit different from what you just heard from Christina and Tim. While we are a true corporate fund, I'm an employee of Novartis. All the money that we invest is Novartis's money. Novartis. But operationally, we report into the finance organization. And our mandate is to invest in early stage, highly innovative startups and generate a return on invested capital. And if Novartis happens to be interested in that area, the target, the program, the therapeutic area, the market, et cetera, so much the better. But that's not the core of our mandate. One of the executives at Novartis recently put it well. He said that a lot of people come to Novartis kind of with their hand out, asking for contributions to the ecosystem. And when Novartis Venture Fund contributes to the ecosystem, then A, it's professionally managed and high quality projects. We're very proud of our portfolio, Mediar included. But B, money comes back to Novartis. And in that sense, our mandate is entirely consistent with Novartis's at a higher order, which is investing in innovative therapeutics in a for-profit model. Our approach is kind of all externalized. So we've joked in other contexts that we're kind of an institutional fund trapped in a pharma company. And that's kind of more or less true. We're kind of a bit neither fish nor fowl. We do take board roles in all of our investments. We play a very proactive role in corporate governance, Mediar and otherwise. We lean in. We work closely with founders and management on strategy and recruitment, on the business plan and operational considerations. So very sort of proactive. About half our investment is in Europe. About half is in the United States. Most of our portfolio is publicly disclosed on our website. There's a few still in stealth mode that are not. Our bread and butter is typically roughly Series A development candidate stage therapeutics, only therapeutics, no med tech, digital health, diagnostics, vaccines, et cetera. But we certainly do some seeds. We look at some early stage stuff. We certainly do some clinical investment. We'll look at some more mature opportunities. And we're very opportunistic. So we're therapeutic area agnostic, we're modality agnostic. We're betting on great teams, great syndicates, breakthrough science, and unmet medical need with real prospects for return on that capital.
Great, thank you. And so our fund at Mass General Brigham, the focus is taking things from the lab, putting them into a company, and investing in that process. So the early origin story of Mediar Therapeutics was one of my partners was actually noticing a theme around some IP that was coming out of the system, some from Mass General, some from Brigham, brought some scientists together and said, hey, fibrosis is a huge issue. You're all working on something that seems to be overlapping. So maybe we should collaborate. And that was kind of the first conversation. And then I'll turn it over to Rahul to kind of catch people up to where it is today.
Yeah. First of all, Roger, thank you for having me here today. I appreciate it. And I will say, first off, Mediar is the beneficiary of a number of people on this panel, so I won't say anything bad about anyone on this panel. But to kind of start where you ended, Mediar is developing novel therapeutics for fibrosis. The concept is novel. We're focused on the myofibroblast, which we believe is the key pathogenic cell in fibrosis. It lays down the aberrant collagen that creates the scar and ultimately organ damage. And only start with that to say it's a big idea, it's first in class, and all targets are novel. And we were lucky enough to have Roger and Meredith see the synergies across 3 different nodes at the Mass General Brigham, a node in lung, a node in liver, and a node in kidney, and roll that up together into a company. And principles first, as everyone knows, especially entrepreneurs, financing first-in-class, untested, novel therapeutics is difficult. And so, Mediar has benefited from the CVC experience in 3 ways, 3 legs to the stool. The first one is the people up here have funded innovation and great science. And that's just like an organizing principle. And certainly, institutional investors can do that. But in the most recent couple of years, and specifically with Mediar, the corporate venture funds have stepped up to do so. As a specific example, when Tim saw the Mediar program through MGB, he called a number of different funds to say, you guys should look at this, we're in. And literally, it was the catalyst that enabled us to find our co-lead Series A investor, Sophie Nova Partners. Tim made that call. So a lot of gratitude toward Tim. Similarly, the concept of funding innovation, Aaron and his team saw that this could be an exciting company with 3 different shots on goals, and he talked a little bit about the portfolio and how he thinks about the portfolio, not just from a strategic standpoint, from a financial return standpoint. Novartis Venture Funds is the other co-lead in our Series A of $105 million. So both of these wonderful people helped enable Mediar beyond the MGB network, which was crucial. The second leg of the stool is making connections. And so as we've accelerated the programs into the clinic, Tim and his team have made connections within the Lilly organization. Those connections start not only from the BD standpoint, but also from what is the killer experiment that you can do to enable this program to move forward. And it's as detailed as don't do the folic acid model, do the nephrectomy model, because that's the model that we use to base decisions on. So it's very strategic and very helpful. Similarly, Aaron and his team have put us in touch with the Novartis kidney team, which has been resurrected after the Chinook acquisition. And so we've been able to talk about our SMOC2 program, which is preclinical, in the kidney context, and obviously that came through Novartis Venture Funds. And then the last part about this is, the third leg of the stool, is advancing the programs themselves. And so one of the investors that's not up here is Pfizer Ventures, and Mike Barron's on the board at Mediar. And Pfizer Ventures, as many of you may know in this room, has a really unique program, and Lilly is catching up, called the Pfizer Ignite program, where you can work with them to help accelerate your programs through discovery and into the clinic, and sometimes beyond the clinic into phase 2 trials. And so as part of that Pfizer investment, they put us in touch with Kathy Fernando at the Ignite team, and that Ignite team ran our GLP tox experiments and ran our bioassay development for IND enabling and ultimately filing of the IND. And just to kind of put a fine point on that last one, when we've had other partners look at our GLP tox data, it has the Pfizer name on it because it's run through Pfizer Ignite. And most of them say, oh, okay, we're good. We don't need to really look further because we trust that data. So as you think about the CVC ecosystem, you think about the funding and the innovation, but then you also really think about how these partners have actually been able to accelerate our programmatic development at a specific compound by compound level. So great beneficiary of that.
Thank you. That's great. And maybe building off that a little bit and going to talk about this, the corporate venture and value add, because there's investment and then there's everything that happens around the investment. And so maybe, again, talk about a little bit, maybe elaborate beyond the Mediar example of how the different ways in which you try and add value to your portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, Lilly has quite an all-encompassing way of trying to help early-stage companies. So one part is the ventures, where obviously that provides capital. We also have a number of lab spaces around the world. So we have 2 sites in San Francisco, 1 in San Diego, and we've just opened in Seaport in Boston. And those are kind of innovation spaces for probably a bit more follow-on kind of stage companies, anywhere between 5 and 30 people. And they are companies where if they come in, they pay the rent, they can work as independent companies and just close the doors like any other incubator. But they also have full access to everything at Lilly. They can ask for anything they want. Some might be related to things that we'll just give companies, cell lines, help, advice on models. But there's obviously a proximity benefit there. And then other more involved, complicated studies might involve some financial sort of transaction along the way. But our job is to accelerate science in many, many different ways. If we invest in a company, irrespective of check size, it's a strategic investment. We think, to put it in context, our indirect exposure to companies through being a limited partner in a fund is somewhere around 1,000 companies. But the 10, 15, 20 a year that we invest in are like the special children. So there you go. And so, we're doing this because we think what they're doing is some of the best work. We think there's a potential path in the future for a fuller collaboration, and it's in all of our interests as well as patients for us to help as much as we can. Some companies want more, some want a little less. I mean, that's in their control. They've got amazing management teams like Rahul who make the call on what's best for the company, but no ask is sort of shot down. We want to hear from companies. If they need any help whatsoever, we can generally find a way to do it. Some are good. They've got all the money and all the staff they need to just run their own show, and that's terrific. We'll just be there monitoring and helping along the way and being ready in case there's a BD transaction. But you'll probably hear later in this panel, there's always ups and downs in the biotech market, whether it's running out of money, whether it's advice on people they're hiring, all sorts of things. But in many cases, we have managed to initially invest in a company, and then they've come to us about advice on lab space. They've come into our incubator. Then they've got a third program that actually they don't quite know how to run, or they need some help with some studies. We've managed to put together a deal to actually do that work for them. And any one of those can happen on its own, or they can all happen together. But generally, we, as a win for everyone, we need this innovation to work. Not all the best brains sit in Lilly, no matter how big it is and how great the financial performance is right now. Many areas of Lilly came in through acquisitions or partnerships or so I think it's in all our interest to try and make this work well, and we're trying to play an effective role and a helpful role to new innovators. So that's the Lilly story.
Great, thanks. How about AbbVie?
I would echo what Rahul said. Really the value, and we also take board seats. We generally don't own more than 20% of a company. We take voting and observer roles, and I think the most value add is taking a new company and helping them actualize the platform potential, focus their programs, have access to our scientists, through phone call or email, and really get that input, very detailed input on specific models, and really the entire experimental setup that aligns it well so that the partnership can progress, expand, go into the clinic, and ultimately, reach patients. Because at the end of the day, that is what this is about. But I think that's the tremendous value, is really working closely with the companies and providing that access to the institutional, knowledge and scientific, R&D engine at AbbVie.
Great, and although Novartis has a different model, perhaps, I suspect the value add is somewhat overlapping.
Yeah, everything Christina was saying resonates very closely. I mean, in all transparency, right? When we invest, that's a reflection of the appetite for the members of the Novartis Venture Fund Investment Committee and our key stakeholders, rather than an indication of interest for the wider Novartis. They have their own processes and their own decision-making bodies, and that's fantastic, but that's not us. We're happy to make warm introductions, and as Rahul said, we have. We very often do. Novartis does partner with portfolio companies. T-Scan is an example from not so long ago. They acquire some of the Novartis Venture Fund portfolio companies. Arctos is an example. But again, those are kind of decisions from the corporate parent that are unrelated to when we first decide to invest, which is often, as I mentioned earlier, early stage, often earlier stage than necessarily the parent is prepared to adopt a program or a platform. So when we get involved, really our portfolio companies get us. And we lean in and we try to do a lot of work. We take board seats, as I mentioned, with every deal. We pay very close attention. We work with management in between board meetings. We're not overboarded as investment managers. So each of us is, I would say on average, something on the order of 5 boards. Some of our friends and colleagues in the institutional world can be 10, 15, 20. So it's, we basically play just kind of a different role in the boardroom, have a different perspective, and sort of add to the collective discussions in the boardroom from that unique perspective of being financially motivated, but coming from, hopefully a stable corporate parent.
Great, and as you think about, and we'll stay with you so you're not always last in the line here, as you think about how you work with your BD teams and how you think about corporate strategy, I'm aware of some corporate funds, they're like, we won't touch anything that might be a BD deal. Our job is to find things that they're not looking at, that are different areas, versus no, if it's not something that we're interested in from a strategic perspective, either now or soon, we're not going to take a look at it. So maybe talk a little bit about how you think about strategy for the fund versus strategy for the overall company.
Yeah, so our investment interest is agnostic to strategy. So we're happy to invest in areas that are strategically interesting to Novartis. Radiotherapies is an example. We're also interested in investing in areas that are not presently of strategic interest to Novartis. We just announced an investment in ONL, for example, in ophthalmology, and it wasn't so long ago that Novartis, the corporate parent, announced it was getting out of ophthalmology. So we invest in an agnostic model. Now, that said, we try to be, shall I say, politically astute. So we keep our ear to the ground. We maintain good relationships with many of the executives, scientific and business leaders in the company. We communicate, our areas of interest. To be clear, in our investments, our portfolio as well as processes maintain confidentiality within the Novartis Venture Fund. But we do probe questions like, Novartis got out of ophthalmology recently. We're thinking about a deal in ophthalmology. Here's why we're interested in this space and why we think this still it would be a good use of Novartis money and reputation, et cetera. And we have conversations like that all the time with the wider stakeholders in Novartis to be good members of the corporate community. And on a related note, also, for strategy, again, in a non-confidential basis, we chat with our colleagues in the business development organization. We're happy to flag opportunities, whether they're in our portfolio or not, that we think might be interesting for our business development partners. And to be clear, it goes the other way. If we find out that business development is in active discussions with a company, we are not going to muddy the waters by attempting to, in parallel, deploy capital as a pure play equity investment. We take a step back at that point and let our parent run their process. If they're not interested from a partnership, but we still think that's a high value investment opportunity, we're happy to re-engage.
Great. How about for AbbVie?
For AbbVie, our diligence process always includes business development, search and evaluation from the respective therapeutic area. We have scientists from discovery research on the calls, and really that's to obviously find an opportunity that is investable in the long term and could result in an M&A acquisition driven by the business development folks, but really it's just soliciting their input until it reaches that kind of phase of development that's in business development sweet spot at that time. And strategies change a little bit year to year, exactly what that means, but it's highly valuable to get their input, and then we kind of pass it off when it's kind of in their territory for diligence. But I think that's another value add is having the cross-functional teams, not only from a scientific perspective, but also from just a deal structure, business development, long-term plan for the company. Being able to get that input early on as a new company is critical.
Great. Tim?
So big companies are complicated. I'll try not to make this answer last about 3 hours, but we're across all of the scale. On one extreme, if something comes in, that's a late stage opportunity that is immediately in our therapeutic areas where, like a new GLP-1 for diabetes that's in a crossover round, that will just go straight to our therapeutic area. We'll just make sure they get to see it, and then what they decide to do is fine. And on the other extreme, we can front run completely new areas of Lilly, a bit like the ophthalmology example. We're looking at some ophthalmology companies right now. Lilly isn't in ophthalmology. We confront that in my team as new science that could come good for the company. And then our sweet spot somewhere in between the two. We're pretty well connected with all of the BD teams at Lilly, all of the heads of search and evaluate. The closer it gets to their interest, the more we try and get them involved. And that's from our sort of indirect portfolio where we're just being shared companies outside, and we want to make sure that Lilly doesn't miss out on any great opportunities. Specifically for the corporate venture fund investments, that is a mixture of things that our team just think are transformational, and then for the ones that are closer to therapeutic areas under CDA, they would help us take a look. What I should say is that there's a very clear separation between church and state. So, for example, in our team, I actually did the original investment in Mediar, but we appointed one of my other team members, Jim McCrell, who may or not be around. He's our board observer in Mediar, and so he's completely separated now from Lilly. He's part of the company in effect. He's the other side of the line, and it's someone like me that does the BD socializing around Lilly. And so we have to be very clear that there's no kind of weird leakage or legal issues, that if you're an observer or on the inside, I get post-board meeting updates from many of my investments, so I'm in effect part of that company now. We have a completely different team who do the BD interactions, and they know this. So what companies want to tell me as an active investor in their company, maybe a little bit more information about their proprietary targets and things. Those are not things they want to share with Lilly, which is fine. But they will share their technology platform and their interests with Lilly, and if the BD team at Lilly wants to encourage them to do a deal or work on some other things, that's for them to do. So we have quite a complicated model where too close to our current interest and too late stage is probably going to be a bit out of scope for my team. And then we obviously go into things that could come into those areas later. We come into adjacent disease indications. For example, we're pretty big in autoimmune disease, same as AbbVie, but I did invest in an allergy company. We're not currently an allergy company, but you can see it's a little bit closer with the types of cells and biology that are happening. And then we have invested in a few completely white space companies that no one, well, I don't know what's going on, and not many people at Lilly can help with those either. So it's a whole mixture of stuff, but it's a bit of a complicated answer. But in general, we're somewhat independent and somewhat connected, and whoever deals with us it will be clear where you sit in that kind of continuum.
Great, thanks. And Rahul, as you've gone from a really very early seed stage company to now a clinical stage company, how have the conversations with the corporate investors shifted, and the role shifted, those kinds of things over time?
That's a really good question. So I think you've heard through the panel and many of my colleagues talk about support. And I think what's unique and what's changing in the corporate venture field is that support is translating to something that feels more like actions and options. And what I mean by options is Pfizer Ventures, Lilly Ventures now have bespoke units that can actually help accomplish a number of your clinical goals. So it's not just, hey, we support your clinical design. It's here's a way to run the clinical study with us. And I have a good friend that's running a program through Chorus right now, which gives them access to tirzepatide. So there's kind of an active moment in I think the CVC landscape that's exciting, and you can see a number of these firms expanding their range of options to have actionable clinical kind of insight, and then they can run your trial if you so choose to do so. So that's one kind of framework. The other framework, which I kind of hit on before, but just to reiterate, is as you think about what's a transactionable study and endpoints that could lead to value inflection for the company, for further investment, a public offering, but also an acquisition. I think what's great about specifically Lilly and Novartis is they understand their BD organizations really well. So as they think about what are the clinical design features that would get their teams on the other side of the fence excited, they can provide that advice on an ongoing basis. And I think that's generally speaking all the way from preclinical to clinical. But at least what's new in my perspective is as you move to the clinic, you actually are double clicking on a number of the advantages that these CVCs have as they extend their footprint into that space.
Great, thanks. So in a minute, we're going to take some questions from the audience. And so Casey has a microphone. So if anybody is interested in being the first one, grab Casey while we're doing this. Just quickly, for each of you, I'm sure there's a lot of people in the audience who have the question. So how is it best to engage with you early on? I have this company, I have this idea. What's the typical way when you say, aha, yeah, let's meet with them? Just quickly down the line.
It's usually pretty easy to find us. Obviously, I would say just know who you're talking to in big companies. Is it BD? Is it ventures? Is it just an interested scientist? Lead with the science. At least for Lilly, we get excited about science and then see if there's a path forward. I'm not a business guy. I've learned that on the job a little bit, at least enough to be dangerous. But I'm a scientist by background, and we want to be excited about new science. There's obviously a lot of experience here in Boston, also where I live in San Francisco, around coaching for what pitches look like, and advice on from people who've done this before. We've invested in many companies that started from a postdoc, became a small team of people, an incubator, and then came to us with really exciting work. So hopefully the ecosystem is, at least since the early days, a little bit more friendly and organized and helpful now to people. But for me personally, please reach out anytime. Take a look on our website, the sorts of areas that we're interested in. Nothing particularly groundbreaking. I just think we'd love to hear from you. But obviously, it's a very competitive world. We can't invest in everything. Be on your A game, I guess I would say, and do your homework. Understand competition, where you could fit in, all the usual things. Pull together a great team. But yeah, I don't think it's anything particularly groundbreaking for me. Just the usual. Come forward with great work.
Anybody else have things they want to add, or should we go to questions?
Well, I having co-invested with MGB and in a company called Therapeutics. It's just knowing what's going on in your ecosystem. We're attending, the luncheon symposiums and having PIs present to us. We're meeting with the technology transfer offices and really staying engaged and updated on, what the innovation is around us. But then there's also the just cold calling and emailing, a non-confidential deck kind of highlighting, what your technology is, why it's differentiated, and why you think it's a good fit, for that target company.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, I won't belabor the point, but very similar thoughts. I think knowing your space and knowing your audience, what we do versus what BD does or what have you is always super helpful. The other thing I'd say is really very helpful is a warm intro, maybe from somebody that already knows us. I mean, that certainly causes us to sit up and take notice. I literally get dozens of introductory requests, certainly per week, sometimes on a given day. And it's really tough to get to everything, however eloquently phrased, so that warm intro can help an awful lot.
Great. So we have time for one or two questions. So who wants to start?
Hi, I'm Haitham Amal. I'm a visiting professor at Boston Children's and Harvard Medical School. I want to highlight on autism spectrum disorder, which is now its prevalence 1 to 36 in the US. My lab and also startup company focus on developing drugs and therapeutics for this. And my question to all, is there any future vision or any current vision to invest in therapeutics and biological diagnostics in autism? Thank you.
Anyone? Go ahead.
I would say there's been just a top-level general resurgence in sort of psychiatric disorders of all flavors. I think the medical breakthroughs that are helping to drive that are better biomarkers, better patient segmentation. Some diseases are obviously difficult, polygenic, poorly understood biology. And so opportunities that come forward, at least to us, we invested in Alto Neuro, I think it was, that have a clever clinical EEG biomarker system for segmenting patients that went public fairly recently. And we're right back at the early stages looking at how genetics and cellular protein maps overlay with each other and whether there's a way forward. I don't think there's appetite to go back to the sort of older days of sort of general phenotypic screening and poorly understood sort of biology. It would need to come forward in the sort of modern framework of disease as best we can, understanding the genetics, who the patients are, what type of biology, validating that through the usual sorts of processes that I'm sure you're aware of. So it's definitely a much more open door now than it used to be. Which diseases are better understood than others in what is generally a complex area, I'm not sure. Certainly we've seen publications come forward with further genes in autism. There's been some publications, I think, from UCSF by memory. So definitely it's a maybe, but I do think there's there's probably a bit more of a scientific way to go before everyone's got the door fully open. That would be my summary. I don't know if others want to help with that.
Certainly can weigh in, but I don't know how we want to use our time.
Let's try one last question here. Sure.
So would just say, neuropsych is indeed an area of a lot of interest, a lot of activity in the market. Generally, I think a lot of that has been later stage. So I think it still can be quite challenging for very early stage, especially drug discovery in neuropsych because of the kind of long road ahead versus sort of shovel-ready clinical stage assets and a question of how to position. So, a few sort of thoughts there. And then the other thing is I think a lot of the resurgence in neuropsych is in addition to Tim's comments, has been driven by increasing sophistication in how to run the trials. So what are the right endpoints? How do you pick the patients? How do you frame a hypothesis and then execute on the test of that hypothesis? And at least for I can say when we've done diligence on neuropsych opportunities, that has been the subject of kind of 80% of our scrutiny up front. What is the validating trial and how can you sort of cast that clinical experiment with great clarity and conviction, such that the investment has an opportunity to pay dividends, not just for investors, of course, but for the patients who so desperately need innovative options.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to the panel for this very informative conversation, and I'm sure people will be around afterwards to answer some more questions too. But thank you much for everyone.
Thanks, Rahul.